What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Trojan Dash. Excuse me. As always, I'm Reagan Griffin, and I'm joined by the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mr. Nathan Ackerman. How are we doing on this fine, beautiful day in Southern California?
I got to be totally honest. I kind of have mixed emotions right now. On the one hand, these are both things we're gonna talk about, of course. But on the one hand, I'm a little bummed because this weekend we're supposed to be playing Alabama. Supposed to be showing up to Jerry World right there in Texas and putting on a show against the Crimson Tide. On the other hand, we got some news yesterday that might take us a little bit closer to Pac-12 football. And again, that's all stuff we're going to get into. So on the one hand, I'm a little bummed about what could have been. On the other hand, excited about what could be in the relatively near future.
Mixed emotions, man. Mixed emotions. A lot of that by a lot of people nowadays. But let's get into what makes you feel good right now, which is the possibility of a conference season this year or possibly next year. Larry Scott said something along the lines of he thinks that it's very possible that they're playing football by winter. And the Pac-12 just made a deal with, I want to get the name right, that is Quidel Corporation, to get rapid testing. You can get your results in as quick as 15 minutes. So that is definitely a step in the right direction in terms of having a college football season this year or some form of a college football season. Nathan, what are your thoughts on this development?
This was not going to happen if they tried to force it. And by that, I mean the Big Ten, other conferences around the country that pretty much aren't the Pac-12 have been saying, okay, we can try to make this happen. We can try to do once a week, twice a week testing, whatever it is. We can try to have the season start a couple weeks later. We talked about the whole, crazy Big Ten start around Thanksgiving scenario that was thrown out last week. But it wasn't going to happen, and it's not going to happen until there's a good, strict test policy in place, one that's effective and one with quick turnaround times like the 15 minutes that this new partnership might allow. Now, that is real progress, and that's something that might actually allow them to have a college season sooner than we expected. I think the closest we thought there might be one was, in the spring, probably starting late January, February, something like that. And I think that's still probably the timeline that we're headed at. But this kind of thing is the only thing that could have sped up that timeline. And I think the news that we saw yesterday is news that could make a huge difference.
I agree with you. I definitely think that's a step in the right direction. However, I will say this. I refuse to believe that there's going to be a season without fans in the stands. And the reason that I believe that is because clearly throughout this entire process, whether you're looking at it from the conference level or from the NCAA's perspective in general, it's been financially motivated. They want to have all of the money that they would be getting from a college football season to funnel into the sports programs. That's why they're so adamant about having one. And in order to get some of that money, you got to have fans in the stands, right? And I think that's the next evolution of what they're going to be trying to be pushing for. And that's just not feasible at this point in time. Like I said, spaghetti and meatballs last week, man. There's just not, we can't allow this thing. So if they're willing to have, say, a season and say there's no one on the field but the coaches, the trainers, and the players, you're looking great. But I don't think that they're willing to do that, man. I don't think that's what they're in the business of doing at all. Just given that it's so fiscally motivated that they want to have all of the money and amenities that they would normally be getting. You can get to the semantics of whether or not the TV contract alone would be worth it, but I'm wondering whether or not they're willing to risk, or not risk, but have a season without fans in the stands.
I disagree with that, and you started to hint at it with the whole TV contract thing, and I think that's really the most important financial aspect of this whole thing. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, I'll admit that, but I believe it is an overwhelming majority of the revenue that college football earns is from those TV things, not through concessions, tickets, fans at the stadium. And I think when you have the only source, if the only way that fans can possibly watch a game is through TV rather than being at the game, those TV things are going to be even more. They're going to make even more money for the Pac-12, all the conferences, the NCAA, whoever. And I think that I don't know if enough of college football revenue comes from tickets, comes from fans being at the game, that they would say it's not even worth it to have a season in the first place, because I think that the TV contracts is where they make their big money, and I think that that's what they care about the most. And if there were no fans at the stadiums, those TV contracts would only be better. They'd only make the conferences more cash. And I think that's ultimately what it's going to come down to, is how much can we offset the possible financial losses by increasing the money we would make through TV contracts. So for that reason alone, I think that I could see a college football season happening even without fans in the stands. And you're kind of seeing the same thing happen with the NBA, the MLB, probably the NFL. I don't know what exactly their fan policy is going to be. Obviously, they aren't allowed to have fans in the stadiums, in the buildings, but they're still going ahead with the seasons because they know that the TV money is so lucrative that they might be able to maybe not totally overcome, but at least chip away at a big part of the financial losses that they might be seeing.
Right. But I will raise this question because I'm not exactly familiar with the business of college football and how that operates, but I wonder whether the TV deal, that money doesn't go directly to a school, right? That goes to the Pac-12 in general for signing that deal. The schools individually, their money, I feel like, comes from the fan experience that you're getting, whether it's the tailgating, whether it's, the seats in the stands, the concessions and all that. Do they get a bite from that? Do they get a chunk of that from the Pac-12's TV deal, or is that money that's reserved for the Pac-12? I'm not sure.
I assume that they get a decent chunk of money from that. I mean, I'm sure the Pac-12 keeps a lot of it, but I bet a lot of it. And again, I don't know the exact specifics, the exact figures, but I'm sure a lot of it goes to those schools. And I think that the schools are going to say, look, if the money that we can get from Pac-12 contracts, NCAA contracts, whatever that might be, and then factoring in the postseason as well. And, I think Larry Scott said it's in the Pac-12's interest, and it's a high priority to try to align the season with the Big Ten to sort of create those traditional postseason matchups, such as the Rose Bowl. And I think if those opportunities are available and schools decide that they get a big enough cut of that, I think there's a very real chance that we could see games being played without fans in the stadium.
To answer the question that we've posed, which is what is the likelihood of a conference football season, I don't think Larry Scott would just talk something out of his ass, right? I don't think he's just pulling it out of his rear end when he says that there's a likelihood that you're playing football by January. I'm just extremely skeptical, man. And whatever product you do see, I feel like it's going to be a bit watered down, just given all of the contingencies. But if we're looking at it like, will football be played at some point in the near future? I guess I'd have to I agree with you and say, sure, they'll probably play football, but I just wonder what the product looks like, man, because I know these dudes are going to be doing everything in their power to try to squeeze every ounce, every dime that they can, and B, just the players, man. I'm not sure how willing they're going to be to go play back-to-back seasons like that. Like I alluded to last week, you have those nagging injuries that dudes are just, you're putting your careers at stake when you say, okay, I have this Achilles thing that's fine now. I can play through it now, but if I have to play through it for the entirety of a year, that could turn from a sprain into a rupture just like that. So I do have my concerns, but let's go ahead and move on to the thing that's bringing you down, man. Long time ago, I don't remember the exact year. I want to say 1973. John McKay, he took USC's team. He goes down to face Bear Bryant in Alabama. He brings his integrated team that has white and black players to Alabama. They play a team that's full of white players, right? Alabama hadn't desegregated the school yet. Kicked their butts. Sam Cunningham rushes for over 200 yards, I want to say, and 3 touchdowns. One of the more historic moments in college football history because a lot of people look at that game as the catalyst to the integration of Alabama's football team, right? Fans are sitting back like, oh, these black kids can play pretty well. And, a lot of people like to say sports is one of the things that will unite people and make people look past those minimal differences. And we were going to see that game again. Not that exact game, obviously, but we were going to see our anniversary of that game this week. It was scheduled to be played on September 5th, but it's not going to happen because of COVID-19. I know you're down about it, man, but I want to hear your thoughts on how you think this game would have played out had they been able to play.
They would have had a chance. USC would have had a chance to win this game. I will give them that. They would not have won. Look, USC is a talented team. They would have come in with a chip on. They would have come in wanting to beat Bryce Young more than anything in the world, and I think Bryce Young would have won the starting QB job. So I think that they would have made it interesting. And again, a lot of the guys like Jay Tufele that we've seen opting out, and a lot of the guys that we might see opt out over the next couple of months of a potential spring season, they would have been here in the fall. So I think they would have made things close. And I think sort of that the emotional aspect kind of thing, the chip on their shoulder, the kind of wanting to send a message, and also coupled with the fact that Alabama last year wasn't that good. I mean, they were one of the better programs in the nation. Of course, they were want to say ranked in the top 15, something like that. But they weren't the typical, dominant elite 1 or 2 or 3 teams that we've seen out of Alabama in the past. So I think that makes them vulnerable. But I don't know if USC has what it takes right now to win that game. I think they would have competed. I think it would have been within 2 scores or so. But in the end, I think Alabama would have come out with that.
I'm going to do something that you haven't seen yet, Nathan, because I don't pull this out of my hat too often, but every so often it's appropriate for me to bring out my alter ego, which is hot take Reagan. I think this is that moment. So these come on.
Oh, man.
The beanie comes on, and I'm going to go ahead and say what I have to say, which is that had they been able to play on September 5th, 2020, the USC Trojans would have defeated the Alabama Crimson Tide. And here's why. 20 out of 22 starters returning for this USC team. That was extremely good last year, right? They had their lapses. You obviously had the BYU game. But this team has immense potential. 20 out of those 22 starters, you lost Michael Pittman, you lost Christian Recker, but you have essentially everyone that made that team who it was back on the field. Meanwhile, you have Alabama, who lost all sorts of talent. Jerry Jeudy. You lost talents on the defensive end. Trevon Diggs. You lost a lot of very, very talented players to the NFL. You have things a little bit in flux. You lost Tua, obviously, so now you have a new quarterback. You're trying to implement a new system, or not a new system, but you're trying to implement with these new dudes. You don't have the level of rapport that USC had built last year. I think for that reason, USC had a better shot to win this game than Alabama did. Because if we're looking at the quarterbacks, right, I will bet my bottom dollar, and I know that's an old phrase. I don't know why a 19-year-old has any sense using it, but I would bet my bottom dollar that Keaton Slovis would have outplayed Bryce Young on that day. Because Keaton Slovis is a top, I'm almost willing to venture to say a top 5 quarterback based on how he played and based on the talent that left this past season. I'll almost want to say a top 5 quarterback in the NCAA. Bryce Young would have been in his first foray into an NCAA game against a defense that is hungry, that has Todd Orlando kicking him in the rear end, that would have ran these dudes to the ringer, and that I guarantee you are a little bit irked at the fact that the dude committed to USC and then went somewhere else. Obviously, it's cool now because we got Keaton. I frankly trust Keaton more than I would Bryce Young, but I'm sure that rubs people the wrong way a little bit, right? So you have that into effect. So I think we win on the offensive end. You have Jay Tufele in this situation, right? Because he obviously would have opted out if there wasn't a COVID-19. So you have a pretty strong defensive line. You have a pretty decent linebacking core. I'm not sure Alabama's running through them like people would think that they would. You do have Najee Harris, but I don't think that dude would have went off on USC per se. So now I'm looking at the defensive end of the ball, and I'm saying, okay, how do I feel about how each team would have fared? And just because you have Keaton, you have Amon-Ra, you have Drake London, you have Tyler Vaughns. I know Alabama's a great defense, but there's no stopping the air raid, man. There's no stopping that Graham Harrell air raid. I think USC would have won this game because Alabama simply would not have had the firepower to keep up, man. That's the bottom line. They would not have had the firepower. All right, I'm starting to look a little ridiculous, so I'm taking this off. What are your thoughts, Nathan?
Okay. Everything you said about Keaton Slovis, I'll buy. I'll take that. I'll take Keaton Slovis as a top 5 quarterback in college football. I'll take Keaton Slovis would have outplayed Bryce Young. I think the experience is a big factor there. I mean, Keaton was one of the most mature quarterbacks in the country last year. He was a freshman. Now he's got a year under Graham Harrell. The sky's the limit for that guy. So I'll buy the quarterback battle in Keaton's favor. I'm gonna reject the argument about USC returning all these starters. And now this is the reason why Alabama is so dominant each and every year, is that they produce NFL talent. Everybody leaves for the draft. Everybody leaves for the league because they produce NFL talent. Nick Saban's legendary at that. But the reason why they're always consistent, the reason why they're always good, is that new guys simply come right in and take their place, and they're just as good as the old guys. Now, I don't know if Bryce Young would have been that immediately. I don't think he would have been that immediately, but it's not just the quarterback position. I mean, the defensive side of the ball, USC last year was not great. And I understand that a lot of that was because of Clancy Pendergast. And I understand that Todd or Orlando is probably an upgrade. Todd Orlando has never had a really dominant defense, and USC has always had talented defensive players. So it's just about getting the most out of those guys. And I just don't think USC's defense is elite enough to the point where it can slow down a team that, sure, is led by a freshman quarterback, but has weapons all around, even if it lost some guys to the draft. I just think that might have been too much for USC.
Smith and Ladron Waddle, but let me hit you with this. Because Orlando, right, his thing isn't making dominant defenses. It's quick turnarounds. This defense sucked last year. I can make it at least passable this year. And that's what he would have done. And I still, whenever we do see football, I'm confident that he's going to take a defense that was subpar last year and make it at least to the point where it's not hurting the offense by being on the field, right? So by nature of that fact, and by nature of the fact that I'm confident in Graham Harrell and Keaton Slovis and the offensive ability to carry the team, and for the defense's ability to not at least fumble the bag because of Todd Orlando, do you think Alabama would have scored more than 30 points? Let me ask you that.
No, I think somewhere,
I'll tell you this. I think USC was about to score more than 30 points.
What's your score? What do you have?
I think that the score would have ended up being somewhere in the range of 31 to 24, 34 to 24, somewhere in there, with USC getting past 30, and then Alabama somewhere in the early to mid 20s, somewhere in there. I'll say final score of 31-24.
Okay. I've got a question. So we know that USC is talented, right? Yeah. We know that USC is the offensive firepower with their defense, I guess. Well, even if we can run with the argument that their defense is passable. Do you think that if this game were to come down to the wire, which I think it would have, because I don't see any universe in which this USC team blows out Alabama.
Agreed.
Do you trust Clay Helton? And I know you're a big Clay Helton guy, so I need you to be really honest with yourself right now. Do you trust Clay Helton? And do you trust a USC team that often lacks composure to win a close game against Alabama, led by Nick Saban, which is known for coming through in those big moments and being one of the most composed teams in college? Well, being an experienced team too.
I'm going to reject your question just because I don't have to trust Clay Helton. I have to trust Todd Orlando and Graham Harrell. And yes, I trust both of those dudes. Clay Helton, again, is a figurehead, right? He's the dude at the top of the thing, making sure everything under him goes smoothly. Clay Helton isn't going to be the one rah-rahing, motivating these guys, but I trust Clay Helton to allow the dudes that he's surrounding himself with to do their job successfully. So if you're asking me the question, do I trust the coaching staff in general to pull us through in a close game? Oh, yeah, 100%. 100%. I think that air raid is built to score quickly. So if USC were to have the ball at the end of the game, they would have had a decent chance. Excuse me if you hear that noise. They would have a decent chance to score the ball in a 2-minute situation. And if they had to make one stop against Alabama, Bryce Young in that situation, not having been there before, I think he would have choked, man. So I think, yeah, if it came down to a close game, I'm pretty confident.
When these games get closer, toward the end, though, when they're really coming down to the stretch, a lot more of that pressure gets placed on the head coach. And I'm not just talking about play calling. I'm talking about, in some ways, getting the team fired up. And I'm talking about, in some ways, clock management, calling timeouts, doing all those small things that head coaches have to do that throughout the years, sometimes Clay Helton has been making these decisions late toward these games that are close. Clock management, timeout usage, all those kinds of things. Where I just say, what in the world are you doing? And it just makes absolutely no sense. And I don't know if I trust him, and I don't know if I trust the coaching staff in general at this point, based on what I've seen, which I admit is not much. I saw a year of Harrell. I haven't seen Orlando yet with this SC team, but I don't know if I've seen enough out of the coaching staff, especially out of play, to be able to hand those late close game, high pressure situations. Now, I also think if coronavirus were not a thing, right? There's no pandemic. Fans are in the seats. Everything's totally cool.
I had a dream.
I think the crowd.
It was really good. Just by the way, just want to throw it out there. I had a dream.
What was that?
I had a dream about there was COVID-19. It was bliss. It was a bliss. Existence.
Yeah, must have been. And it also would have meant that Garrett World would have been packed, and it would have been packed with Alabama fans for one, because USC fans, they travel fine. They haven't been traveling as well as they do in recent years, and Alabama fans go all over the country, and this place is closer to Alabama. Anyway, so this place would have been packed with Alabama fans, meaning we are trusting Sure, experience, but still a USC team that hasn't faced that sort of national stage. I mean, they've been playing Pac-12 football for the last couple of years. They've been playing the Holiday Bowl. They were in the Rose Bowl like 3 years ago, but most of the guys on that team are here right now. They didn't even play a bowl game 2 years back. So they haven't really been faced with these sort of everything on the line, national spotlight, coming down to the wire against elite competition, fans roaring, everybody hoping that they will lose. Even though everybody hates SC, it's not really anything compared to what Alabama fans would have brought. So again, we are trusting a coaching staff and a team that has never really dealt with that before. And we're doing that against one of the most talented teams in the entire nation that is good year in and year out, and that is led by elite coaching year in and year out. And I think it's more so those sort of X factors, those sort of outside things that USC, I don't know if they are comfortable with, if they're accustomed to handling right now, more than it is the product on the field.
Let me ask you this, man. You asked me the question, what do you think the final score would be? I'll flip that to you. What do you think the final score of this game would have been?
Alabama 31, USC 24. I'll give them 31.
So you got the flip. You got the flip of it.
Maybe 31-21.
See, there's just no world to me in which that offense, with a year under its belt and essentially almost all of its talent returning with the exception of Michael Pittman, and you have Brew McCoy sitting in the wings ready to take on that role, that offense, if they put up less than 28 points against anyone that they play, it's a disappointment. I don't see them putting up less than 28 points against anyone. There's no way you hold that team to less than 4 touchdowns.
Okay, fair. Point taken. I also think that USC, for at least the 2 years that I've been here, the 2 season opening games that I've seen, they've never looked really good. I mean, they handled UNLV, I think it was my freshman year, and they handled Fresno State, but neither of those games were really blowouts, and in neither of those games did they look really as good as they probably should have. Now, the Fresno State game, that game was way too close. I've just seen this season start. I've seen this team start seasons with games that were way closer than they should have been, because of rust, because of whatever it might be. Maybe they haven't gotten the offense down yet. They haven't gotten the defensive scheme down yet. Maybe it's a chemistry thing. I won't pretend like I know what's going on inside the locker room. But I've just seen this team start too slow. And now to throw them right into the mix. Game 1 against Alabama, I don't know if they would have been able to hit it.
A lot of faith you have in those SEC schools, man. And on the note of SEC, let's talk about a former Trojan, JT Daniels, who transferred from USC this offseason to an SEC school, the University of Georgia. Trevor Denton, if you're somehow watching this, I know you're happy about that. Jamie Newman, a quarterback that has a chance to possibly go in the first round this year. Obviously, you have the Trevor Lawrences and the Trey Lances of the world, but Jamie Newman has a shot to, I would say, to sneak into the first round. He opted out. He's not going to play football this year, and whenever we do see college football happen. So that leaves the quarterback room a little bit open because he was the projected starter. Now JT has a shot to step into that realm. Do you think that JT Daniels would be successful this season as Georgia's starting quarterback?
Yes. I think if this season were to happen this fall, even if it's going to happen this spring, JT Daniels is going to make a lot of USC fans not regret losing him, because I still think Keaton Slovis is a better quarterback, but they're going to be taking back a lot of the slander. Now, I wrote a column for this in the Daily Trojan about a couple months ago when JT first announced that he was entering the transfer portal, and I said, please hold off on the JT Daniels slander. This guy was not as bad as people love to claim that he was. Sure, he was a 5-star talent coming out of high school. Sure, he was the number 2 overall quarterback in the nation, or overall recruit, I think, in the whole country. And sure, he had some bad interceptions. I know our producer, Sam Arslanian, loves to talk about how he threw 4 interceptions against UCLA or whatever. This guy showed flashes of being excellent. This guy showed flashes of being one of the most talented passers in the entire nation. He was young his freshman year, of course. He had a T. Martin as his offensive coordinator, which will not bode well for any quarterback, no matter how talented you are. He didn't have the weapons that SC had the last year. And he showed flashes. The guy's deep ball was insane. He showed flashes of being able to make some passes, being able to make some plays, keep some plays alive, that most other quarterbacks in the nation would not have been able to make. So I think he would have. I think he would have torn it up, and I think he will torn it up the next time there's a college football season. I think JT Daniels is going to be the man.
USC fans, from my experience, suffer from the same sort of same sort of mentality as Lakers fans. And that's mentality of one that's I need my results now. I have the highest of expectations for you. My team has been at the top of its game forever since I can remember. And the leader of my team has always been this transcendently great talent, right? When you look back at the USC quarterbacks, the Mark Sanchez's, the Matt Barkley's, the Sam Darnold's, the Carson Palmer's, you've had all of these great talents come through USC. So when you have a quarterback that's highly touted and comes here, is that an expectation that you're immediate the second that you take that snap and you're the starter, you better be freaking good. Because if you're not, these fans will start bashing you. Even if you're pretty good, even if you're above average, if you're not meeting the expectations of Heisman candidate, Rose Bowl in the Rose Bowl throwing for over 4,000 yards, if you're not meeting that bar, then people are going to look at you like you suck, even though that might not be the case. And I think that's exactly what happened with JT Daniels. He took the helm as a freshman, and he didn't have this phenomenal season that everyone might have thought that he had, which is understandable as a freshman quarterback. That's generally what you get out of freshman quarterbacks. If we would have seen Sam Darnold thrown into the fire as a freshman, he would not have done that well. Most quarterbacks, there's few guys who can come in and immediately have a substantial impact. Obviously, we saw it from Keaton, and I almost feel like because we saw it from Keaton, the slanders piled onto JT even more because of how phenomenal Keaton was, right? We're like, well, this 3-star can do it. Why can't the second best quarterback in the nation have done it? There's obviously a little bit of context that has to be thrown onto there, whether it was the offense, whether it was the introduction of Graham Harrell, whether it's the weapons around him. You got to have a little bit of context. And I'm 100% with you, man. I think JT Daniels is a guy that needed a little bit of time, possibly more time than we all expected. But he's not a bad quarterback by any stretch of the word. He's not a bad quarterback. That dude has an arm. He's accurate. He didn't make the best decisions. I think he suffers from hero ball mentality, the idea that he should be the one to carry the team. If he gets himself out of that mindset and he goes and takes the game as it comes to him, that dude's going to be at least a 3rd-round pick in my mind. I think he has the possibility, if he goes up there and performs in Georgia, he could be a 2nd, maybe even 1st-round pick one day. But to say that JT Daniels is a bad quarterback is a woefully wrong assessment of the guy's talent, because he's never been a bad quarterback. Did he make bad decisions? Did he suffer from bad situations? Hell yeah. Bad quarterback? Not even close, man. Not even close. I think JT Daniels, if he gets the opportunity to start for Georgia this year, he'll definitely take a step up from what we saw at USC. And over time, man, he's in a great situation down there with that's Kirby Smart, right? If I'm remembering correctly.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. He's in a great situation down there with Kirby Smart. He establishes a rapport with that dude. He gets things going. Obviously, Kirby Smart's a loyal dude. He stuck with the cat. With Jake Fromm over Justin Fields, even though that was clearly the wrong decision in my opinion. He's loyal to his quarterbacks, and if you build a trust with him, obviously you're going to have opportunities. I think that's what's going to happen for JT. So I'm excited to see it, man. I think JT is going to have a lot of great football ahead of him.
Yeah, nothing JT Daniels is going to do the next time he plays college football is going to make USC fans reconsider the decision between Keaton and JT. I want to make that very clear. Keaton Slovis is going to continue to be a stud. I don't think he's going to be quite as good as he was his freshman year, but it's also possible that he competes for a Heisman and ends up as a Heisman finalist, only second to Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, probably, in my opinion. But I think he's going to make people say, we shouldn't be talking about him the way that we do. And we shouldn't be saying that he never had a chance to be great. We shouldn't be saying that he's a bust. Because Keaton Slovis is a better quarterback. Keaton Slovis is going to continue to be the better quarterback. USC just had too many options, and one of them had to go. And whichever one lost that job, whether it was Keaton, JT, they were going to have to go because they're talented enough to be quarterback somewhere else. But JT is going to make a lot of people reconsider what they said.
Well said, Mr. Ackerman. I think that'll do it for this episode of the Trojan Dash. Thank you, Nathan, for coming on. As always, I had a hell of a time talking football with you, man. Make sure you go check out all the social media, Instagram and Twitter at dashsports.tv. Or no, dashsports.tv, excuse me. Dashsports.tv is the website where you can go check out condensed segments of all of our shows. A lot of people like to talk about USC on their shows. It's funny.
Everybody hates us. Everybody hates USC except for USC. So we're probably going to get a lot more slander on all the other Dash Sports TV shows Yeah,
They hate us because
that's the cup.
they hate us because they hate us. Because you know what? I'll say a lot of schools in this conference would have liked to have Keaton or JT. I'll just throw that one out. But that'll do it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.